Good day, chaps. So this is the last and final part of our range walks. In the previous episodes, we found some rare conquerors, some Shermans, and a comet. In this video, we're going to travel up and over the cliffs and down to the valley in search of a railgun. As we made our way past various bushes, we found yet another tank hidden deep inside one. This vehicle, nicknamed Brambles, was an old Churchill Mark IV. Possibly an Avery or a gun tank, but it's hard to tell now. Quite what her backstory was unknown to me. There is no longer a turret or deck plates, and the track on one side is gone, with just the front idler showing. Many of the external fittings and even the access points are missing, while on the other side, one set of tracks and tinwork seem relatively intact. The whole vehicle was now more or less a 20-ton novelty flower pot for brambles and ferns, and getting much closer resulted in just getting shredded. As there didn't appear to be too much left, we just potted on, and soon enough another vehicle in a similar state cropped up. Just off the path and down a slope was a half-eaten comet, neatly snipped in two. Now I wasn't sure what had just eaten half a tank, and I wouldn't put it past some of the local sheep. And so after a precautionary glance into the gorse bushes to check for any obvious ambushes, we headed down to take a look. The front is well and truly shot in, with a catastrophic failure on one side and neat punctures along her front. Clearly visible is also the double-skinned construction, and the distinct gaps down the side that hold the suspension. The comet itself has been cut in two, and was probably done to turn one wreck into two targets, which kind of defeats the purpose of so many others being scrapped in the first place, just making more work for yourselves. But then that's sort of an MOD thing. From the back you can see where it's been cut through, and the springs from the old Christie type suspension are poking out the side. The rear bulkhead, or what's left of it, is still in place, but also shot away from spool damage and small arm strikes over the years. Looking a bit further inside, the contents are all missing, and of course the serial plaques are gone. But one thing did stand out, and that was the large amount of dishing on the internal strikes. The wheels and suspension are also long gone, although the tracks are still there, well, at least half of them, and the sides show where the bolts would have popped out after taking hits over the years. After deciding not to stick around much longer, and with a few choice words said to the gorse bushes that got through the trousers, I headed back up the slope to continue our journey. Heading up through the fields, we spied a new vehicle on the crest of a hill, and the commandant decided to have a drive up to it, doing his best not to get bogged down in the mud, which could have been embarrassing. And upon arriving, we got to take a look at what is still an unknown vehicle. Well, clearly it's a comet of sorts, but this one has had something done to it. Immediately we can see this vehicle has had all sorts of attachments welded onto it, the most obvious being the rectangular thing stuck to the side behind the suicide hatches, and the rear-mounted railings, with more parts welded on top where the turret would have been, and some sort of nose piece added. These bits had been welded on prior to it going to the range. But why? The side of the vehicle shows massive damage from all manner of shot and fire. The wheels are shredded and many are missing, with the return rollers having gone. But I found them inside the hull, and you can see where they were once attached. Looking into the back of the vehicle, you can see that this might have been driven up here before becoming a ranged target. Not only is its gearbox intact, well, as intact as a ranged target can be, but the Rolls-Royce meter engine is also in place, although it's seen better days. It's now missing its casing, exposing the working parts to the rain, and a bush has decided to grow up out of the block. It's also around this time that I felt a faint tremor in the ground, but being too focused on the tank, I paid it no heed. The back of the vehicle shows more of the unusual workings added to this machine. Some sort of extension over the rear sides, and several suggestions have been put forwards. A comet bridge layer, at least one was made, but I don't think so. It could have been a test bed for the Comet Malkara missile, but this looks nothing like the known model. And as to date, I've never heard of a Comet Avery, except those built by South Africa. At this point, it became more apparent on what that faint but growing trampling sound was, as a horde of enraged local Scottish cows had descended upon the plains to drive the English out.
Moo! 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 Moo!
But as we finished taking photos of this old comet, this dull thud, thud, thunk sound began, as the cows took it in various turns to headbutt the commandant's car, determined to demonstrate that modern side panelling is no match for half a ton of high-speed curious bovine. We took a few more pics, but not wanting the comms car to suffer more beef-based damage, and suspecting there was probably a flanking formation of local sheep approaching behind the gorse, we set out in search of more tanks. The next one on the ranges looked okay from a distance, but as always, looks can be deceiving. Approaching another comet from the back, I could see a cluster of 30mm rounds that had gone through and through, and I could see from here that the back decks were damaged, but her tracks looked okay. And then I decided to look on the other side. Oh boy. This poor comet has been very badly chewed up, and from .50 armor-piercing rounds. The whole front and side of the vehicle has been well and truly peppered with these heavy caliber rounds, many of which have gone through the softer sides and weak areas, and ripped the insides apart, while the front plate has taken a very heavy hit, possibly a Malkara strike, which has simply deleted the glacis altogether. A closer look shows the damage that's been done. The main barrel has been sawn off and the whole front is riddled with shot, and many of the rounds can still be found wedged in the holes themselves, or on the ground around the tank and can be wiggled out with some effort, while others have shredded their copper jackets and fused. The wheels have also been shot away, and it can barely be called a wheel at all these days. The inside isn't much better. It's full of ash and burnt bits of timber. This one has definitely been used as a thermal target. It's littered with spent rounds and little explodey things I didn't fancy poking around with. Taking a few more pics and finding a few more stray AP rounds to have a look at, you could really see the damage that even heavy machine gun fire can do to a tank if used correctly. And while the .50 isn't a small round, it does help debunk the idea that tanks are immune to small caliber rounds, and which is why such vehicles underwent testing in the first place. There wasn't too much more to see on this vehicle. After having a bit more of a look around inside and watching closely where I was standing, we descended down out of the hills and back towards the lowlands. Through the trees and branches another vehicle was quickly spotted, and we popped over to take a closer look. Although now we're out of the hills and the cool wind, the humidity was up and the flies were back. I've been reliably informed now that the Scottish name for them is clegs, a 5-letter word beginning with C. Close enough. Nevertheless, we trundled on, doing our best to swat the buggers out of the way, and we found this Daimler armoured car, which has seen better days and is now a novelty flower pot as well. If it ever had a turret, it's long gone, and inside it's mostly overgrown, although the engine is still visible, or parts of it are. The armour has been overmatched, causing this distinct shattering and sharding of the steel, although what did this is hard to say, as the armour is only proof against light arms fire at best, and even 2-pounder rounds will break this steel apart, the telltale cracks and jagged edges being so prominent when steel fails this way. In other places you could make out the dual layer plate, with the soft inner skin and harder outer layer being visible, the idea being that the outer carbon-rich steel breaks up the shot and the inner ductile steel absorbs energy and prevents splash, at least from small rounds. We set off to find the last of our objectives on the list, and for this trip the experimental railgun sheds. The railgun sheds were ahead and we took our time to have a good look around, although the main interior of the buildings was still off limit, and would have held the capacitors and batteries. The MOD set up both electromagnetic and electrothermal gun testing systems here in the early 90s, with a 2-kilometre downrange and a shorter 100-metre range, to test these weapons, notably a 32 megajoule pulse power 90mm gun. The site, once top secret, came under the name Rosetta, although I've also seen the word Roseline recorded, so if you worked there, do let me know the correct name. Either way, its layout was quite similar to other projects. Today the concrete outhouses used to mount the weapons are empty, with just the thick concrete walls and openings left. Whether it will be used for other projects remains unknown. The 240 tons of concrete and 7 tons of steel in the tunnels alone may be useful for future projects, or it just might slowly collapse, time will tell. With that said and done, our trip came to a close, and we headed back into town to get a beer and relax. It was a great opportunity to have a look around this range, one that's not open to many people, and to be able to share this stuff with you guys. A special thanks goes out to Peter Breakspear, and if you like range wrecks, he's got several books on the subject, the link below, and to the MOD for allowing this. I hope in future to be able to do more range walks, as it seems you guys have quite enjoyed these. I need to crack on with more tank stuff, but keep your eyes peeled. If I do more, I'll let you know as soon as possible. But I hope you enjoyed this small series, and until next time, toodle pip.